What's up, guys? This is Steve with the Padernacht real estate team at Keller Williams. What I want to do today is I want to talk about the seller's timeline. So a lot of times when I'm speaking to sellers, they ask me like, hey, how long is it going to take to sell my home? Or they're going to ask me, what do photos include? What photos are you going to take? Do I have to clean? Do I have to declutter? Do I have to paint my house? What I'd like to do today is kind of just put a little bit of clarity behind that and actually run through the timeline and some important markers for you to stay aware of. So we're going to assume that you have already agreed with me to hire our company as your real estate agent. So what does that actually mean? What that means is that I'm going to supply you with a list of documents. Those documents basically give me the exclusive right to sell your home. Now, what does exclusive right to sell mean? The exclusive right to sell means that no matter what, during the duration of that agreement, let's say we agree for 90 days to work with each other. Whether or not you find the buyer, whether or not I find the buyer, whether or not your neighbor comes and knocks on the door, that means that I am owed a fee if that home sells. Now, there's a lot of discrepancy when it comes to this point. And a lot of sellers will tell me, hey, but if it's my neighbor or if it's somebody that I went to school with or it's somebody that I work with, why do I have to pay you a fee? And the simple reason is that you're not necessarily paying me to find the buyer. Yes, I will help you find the buyer, but what you're really paying me for is to help bulletproof the transaction and walk you through step by step what it takes to get your home sold. Now, I don't remember the exact number, but the National Association of Realtors put a statistic out last year, and it said that I believe it was just north of 30% of all accepted offers don't actually make it to the closing table. Now, there's numerous reasons why your home wouldn't make it to the closing table after an accepted offer, but I'll talk about a few. Most home sales include what's called an inspection contingency. Now, the inspection contingency is extremely important because what it does is it allows the buyer to go through your home with a third-party vendor to look at the structural, look at the mechanical, look at all of the nooks and crannies of your home. So that way they're not basically buying something that they're going to then have to spend a ton of money on renovating after they close. That inspection clause, if things come back that are well outside of the price range that the buyers are able to afford to fix, they may choose to walk away from the deal. To combat this, what we do is we like to ask for what's called a pre-inspection. And I advise all my sellers to get a pre-inspection because what it does is it allows them to now be in the buyer's shoes and see what the major issues are in the home. If you know what the problems are, you can help better prepare yourself for when the buyers walk through the door. Perfect example. Let's just say that you know that the electricity needs to be upgraded. When we're pricing your home, we're going to take that into consideration. So, for example, if you were going to ask maybe, let's just say $700,000, but now you found out that the entire electrical needs to be redone, we're going to maybe reduce the price a little bit and maybe price it down at something like $680 or maybe $675. And then what we'll do is we'll put on the listing sheet and we'll tell all the buyers before they walk in, just so you understand there's an issue with electricity. So before you make your offer, make sure that you're taking that into consideration. So that's an example of how using a pre-inspection would help the seller, because if you don't disclose that information and you don't do that, then you're going to get an offer, let's just say $700,000. They're going to do their inspection, then they're going to come back and they're going to try to chew your price down. We don't want this. Again, we want to bulletproof the transaction. So signing the agreement. Once we sign the agreement, the first thing that's going to happen is we're going to talk about scheduling to have the sign installed, and we're going to talk about scheduling to get the photos done. Now, part of the photography consultation is going to be talking about staging the home. Now, when I say staging the home, it's interesting because now in 2025, staging can be done virtually. So, for example, let's just say you have a vacant home with no furniture in it. I can make that home online look like it's got a couch, a television, a beautiful kitchen table, beds, the whole 9 yards. That does not, however, help us when people are walking through the home. When they're walking through the home, what might help, let's just say you are still living there. What would help is maybe if we wanted to declutter the home. I tell everybody, if you've got one of those closets that you just stuck everything in for the past, 10, 15 years, you want to clean that closet out. Maybe rent a storage. Maybe buy a bunch of bins and put them downstairs in the basement, in a back corner or something. You want to make sure that when buyers are walking through the home, they're not seeing all of the clutter that you have there. And that's part of staging. Now, another perfect example of talking about staging is depending on whether or not you have carpets or hardwood floors or some sort of tiles. If you have a hardwood floor, what I might recommend you do is buy an area rug. An area rug doesn't cost a lot of money, but it makes a huge difference. Another example of staging might be, I might ask you to say, hey, you know what? A couple of these rooms might need a fresh coat of paint. Let's put a fresh coat of paint on these walls to actually really spruce it up. So all of these three things kind of happen together. We talk about scheduling the photography, we talk about staging the home, and we also talk about installing a sign. Now, the reason why I bring that up is because most agents, what they do is they just walk in there, they stick a sign in the ground, and it's got potentially their office phone number on it, maybe a photo of them, and there really is no value to you, the seller, besides the fact that people are going to maybe call and not get a call back from their agent. The signs that I like to use are actually more updated with today's technology. I like to make sure that I have a QR code on the sign so that way people can actually scan it and get live information right there. Now, once they do that, there's also a button on that they can press and it says, get in touch with me now. And that notification goes directly to my cell phone. So think about the difference in just having a regular sign in the ground and having a sign that's actually digitally enhanced for today's technology. I think we would all agree that having one that's more digitally enhanced would help and help you, because I think the most important thing for you to understand is that I'm getting back to the buyers. Every single potential lead that calls, I am making sure that I get back to them and give them relevant information about selling your home. Now, just a follow-up to photography, what I like to do is I always book professional photography. Reason being is the first thing that people see, the first impression that people are going to get of your home is going to be the photos that they see online. If you have bad photos, bad lighting, photos taken from a bad angle, these things are going to affect how many people walk through the door and how many people actually come to look at your home. That's why I like to use professional photography. I use a company called Laurel and Grand. Joe is amazing. Big shout out to Joe from Laurel and Grand. He is able to capture the essence of your home. He's able to hit all the right angles. He's able to hit all of the spaces that need to be hit. And additionally, what he does is he actually supplies a floor plan for me as well. You know those things that when you bought a home, many, many years ago, and they gave you a survey at the closing and that one file that you just can't seem to find? Well, I don't make you go back looking for that. What I do is I book a photographer to come in and do the floor plan, do the professional photos, because I want to make sure that the first impression buyers get of your home is going to be a wonderful one and make them entice them to come out and take a look at your home. Now, I want to touch a little bit on that first impression. Also, when it comes to the listing itself and where it goes online. Now, what most realtors do is they turn around and they put your listing up on what's called the MLS, or the multiple listing services. What I do is I also make sure that it gets syndicated out to all of the right areas, right? So the MLS automatically sends it out to, Zillow, Realtor, Redfin. But what I do also is I like to put it out in other areas too. So let's say, for example, you're selling your home in Riverdale. What I would do is I would figure out a way, and some of these groups allow it, some of them don't, but I would figure out a way to get it on all the local marketplaces and all the local groups and all the different places, so that way buyers are seeing it even if they're not getting notifications on their Zillow account or whatever the case may be. In that listing is going to be an actually well-written description of your property. Now, selling your home requires us to have buyers think emotionally and not necessarily not necessarily, I don't want to say unintelligently, but we want them to make an emotional decision. The way we do that is by having great copywriting and making sure the photos match that copywriting. Most realtors, if you go online right now and you look, you'll see every one of them sounds the same. And you know why? It's because they're all using ChatGPT. And all they're doing is just throwing it in ChatGPT, and it gives you this generic sort of description of a property. So what I do is I do use ChatGPT, but what I do is I give it specific prompts. And I write in all of the things that I like about the home, all of the things that buyers and the trending things that buyers are looking for today in 2025 are looking for. And during our consultation, you and I, the seller, I ask you, what made you fall in love with this home? What made you buy this home? Because I guarantee you that the same reason you bought this home is why the next person's going to buy this home. So that covers us all the way up to when the listing goes live. Now, after that, one of three things is going to happen, okay? The first is going to be either we get tons of offers, tons of showings. What this means is that we've priced your home correctly. This doesn't mean that we've underpriced it. It means that we've priced it correctly. The second thing that may happen is we get tons of showings, but no offers. Think of this like as if you are, always the bridesmaid, but never the bride. There's something going on, and usually it's either going to be a price issue or it's going to be something about the conditions with your home. It means that your home is in a desirable area and people want to move to that area, but there's something going on. Now, when it comes to this second situation, what I usually tell people is that it's usually something about price. Now, what I recommend is usually anywhere between a 3 to 5% price adjustment, and that usually does the trick. Now, the third thing that could happen is you get no showings, no offers. What this means is that your home is priced probably 7 to 9% higher than what the value is. Again, please keep in mind, only two things move in any market. Two things matter: price, condition. We can't build you a new home. We can help stage it, but what we can do is price it competitively. And this is why it's important to understand your motivation for selling and being very understanding with what's going on in the market today. So hopefully by this point, we've received a bunch of showings and we're getting feedback. What I have is I have a system that allows us to get feedback very quickly. So if somebody saw your house on Saturday at 3 p.m., by 4 p.m., they're getting a text message from me, and they're also getting an automated email with the form to fill out to tell me their feedback. And it asks them some very basic questions. One question would be, what was your overall opinion of the home? What do you think of the pricing? Is your buyer interested in making an offer? And last but not least, what do you think the home is actually worth if you're not considering putting an offer in today? These 4 questions will give us so much information, and it's not only going out to people who are looking at the home through their buyer's agents. What's also happening is I'm sending it to direct buyers as well. I don't necessarily have to send it to them because I'm usually there with them or somebody from my team is. So we're extracting this information kind of as the showing is going on. Let's assume that we've listed the home and we have an offer that is acceptable to you and to the buyer. What happens now is, let's just say we get 3 or 4 offers. And one of the offers, let's say, is $600,000 with 5% down. But they want a mortgage contingency, an appraisal contingency, and a home inspection contingency. Well, if we had an offer that was, let's say, $5,000 or $10,000 cheaper, but didn't have any of these contingencies in it, I would advise you to most likely take that offer over the second offer, even though it's more money. So this is what's called negotiating offers, right? So if a buyer submits an offer to me, I go back to them after speaking to you and I tell them, hey, this is what's important to my seller. How can you match this? It's a lot of fast moving texting and phone calls, but usually what we're able to do is we're able to negotiate some terms that are, win-win for both parties. Everybody thinks that they have to win a negotiation, but that's not true. Everybody has to lose a little, okay? And in that situation, it really proves to people that somebody feels like we both gave a little and we're both walking out of this with a fair deal. Once we have an accepted offer, what happens at that point? Once we have negotiated the offer, we have an accepted offer, we did the inspection. What happens then is we send out what's called a memo of sale. That memo of sale goes out to the attorney representing you and the attorney representing the buyer. Now, I'd like to preface this part by stating that this is valid for New York State. New York State is an attorney state, meaning you need to either have an attorney or waive your right to an attorney when doing a real estate transaction. There's a lot of states where the agents and the realtors are handling those contracts, and it's not an attorney state. So if you're not in New York, please check with your local market. But we're going to assume that we're talking about real estate here in the Bronx, Westchester County, Rockland, or anywhere in New York State. So we send out what's called a memo of understanding. This memo of understanding is non-binding. Nobody has to pay money up to this point, besides if you wanted to pay your attorney, maybe a retainer fee. And both attorneys then get in contact with each other. Okay, it's usually an email that goes out to me, both attorneys, and the other agent. The memo of understanding just outlines what we've negotiated to this point. We've negotiated a mortgage contingency. We've negotiated an appraisal contingency. We've negotiated the fact that the inspection has been done and that the buyers are happy with the condition that it's in. And then the seller's attorney usually sends the contract to the buyer's attorney. This process can be as quick as 24 to 48 hours or possibly drag on for a little bit more time if there's some issues to iron out. But let's assume it's a smooth transaction and the contracts are able to be signed within a week. Now, when the buyer signs that contract, what they do is they put up what's called escrow money or an escrow deposit. Now, that deposit gets held by one of the two attorneys. Usually, it's the seller's attorney or your attorney that's holding on to that escrow deposit. Now, depending on the terms of the contract, that deposit is either refundable or non-refundable, depending on what's going on in the contract. So to keep this very generic or general, we're going to say that it's a standard contract where the buyer, again, has a mortgage contingency, which means that if they're not able to get a mortgage for any reason that is outside of their own control, they get their deposit back. If, for example, they do something that may affect that mortgage contingency, then they would lose that deposit. And the benefit to you, the seller, is that usually your attorney's holding it in their escrow account. Now, you can't use that money. That money is held in escrow until either the property closes or there's some sort of agreement as to how that money gets spread out after the transaction if it doesn't happen. Now, once you're in contract, the buyer's going to leave a deposit. He's going to sign the contract. They're going to send it to your attorney. Your attorney's then going to, in turn, send it to you to countersign. Once that happens, you are officially in contract. And what happens is the realtor or myself then starts working with the buyer's agent and their lender, if they're getting funding, which most transactions do include funding, to get what's called an appraisal done. Now, the appraisal process, I don't really have anything to do with that. Besides, what I like to do is I like to prepare, 3 to 5 comparable properties, and I like to send it to the buyer's agent so that way he can give it to the appraiser. That way, in case there's any issues where potentially the house doesn't appraise properly, they have the information that I sent over to them to try to make sure and push their decision to go in the right direction. Now, they changed something not a few years ago, but probably many years ago, where the appraisers are completely outside of the bank's purview. It's a completely third party. The banks, what they used to do is they used to just have somebody that they worked with or somebody they knew to make sure that the appraisals came in good, or in case they didn't want it to come in, they would then, push the appraisal down. Now it's a complete third party, and they are bound by a fiduciary to be able to make sure that they are doing a non-biased price opinion of your property. In this part of the process, after me sending them the comps, there's not really much for me to do, but I will, in case the appraisal doesn't come back good, what I will do is I will request for them to potentially do a second appraisal, or I might advise you to do your own appraisal, and then we could submit that to them for review. Now, I don't want to get in the weeds too much here. I don't see a lot of this happening in today's market, so just know that I'm with you every step of the way, specifically during the appraisal process. After the appraisal happens, then what happens is the loan or the buyer's loan mortgage goes into underwriting. At this point, my hands are completely tied, and this is all between the buyer and their lender and their underwriting process. So this usually takes anywhere from, in today's market, I'd say probably, depending on the bank, anywhere from like 2 to 4 weeks, just the underwriting process. So think about it, right? We listed your home, let's just say 2 weeks ago. Now you're talking about another 2 to 4 weeks for underwriting. You know, we're into this process now for about 2 months or 60 days. And I gave a market update earlier where I said that the average home in the Bronx right now is selling, you know, it's taking anywhere from like 45 to 60 days anyway. So this is right in line with what's happening. During underwriting, the lender will basically ask the buyers for everything but their firstborn. I mean, they have to give pay stubs, they have to give taxes, they have to give bank statements, they have to give everything that they need to be able to satisfy the bank that they can afford to close this loan. And a lot of this changed after the crash in 2008. What they were doing back then was they were giving a lot of what's called no-doc loans or no documented loans, meaning like anybody with a pulse could have gotten a mortgage in those days. Now it's not like that at all. And I think that by them doing that, what it's done is it's made sure that the market doesn't have another burst like it did back then. Now, one point that I want to get to that I did not get to earlier is when offers are submitted to me on behalf of the buyer's agent, what I like to do is I like to ask to speak to the lender. I have a list of questions, anywhere from 10 to 15 questions that I ask the lender. And they're not allowed to divulge specific financial information, but I do ask questions like, when was the last time you ran their credit? What was the last pay stub that you saw? What is their debt to income? Have you checked to make sure that they have their down payment money? I do this, again, as part of bulletproofing the transaction. So that way we don't have any surprises during underwriting. So underwriting happens, and what I do at that point is, you know, we make sure that there's no issues going on in the house. And I advise you to make sure that the house looks the same when you actually close as it did when the buyers walked through and did their inspection. Reason being is, if you decide that you want to potentially, hang a TV or do something or put holes in the wall, or let's say you have a big leak in the house and something happens with the roof or the windows or the basement, it is your responsibility to make sure that you fix those issues before closing. So now we're up to clear to close. Clear to close is a beautiful day, right? It's an email that usually comes in from the lender and it says, hey, we are clear to close this loan. What that means is that they have done all of their due diligence, they've done the appraisal, they've checked everything they needed to check in terms of the buyer and also the home, and they are ready to fund the loan. Now, what happens at this point is we schedule a closing, you have your attorney and their attorney, and everybody starts working out schedules. Now, what I just ran through is a typical transaction. There's a lot of things that happen that I did not mention or that can potentially happen. And I just want you to understand that me as a real estate agent and my job and a good realtor is able to navigate you. And again, I want to just stress on the phrase of bulletproofing the transaction. And you're not hiring a realtor that's just sticking their sign in the ground and throwing it up on the MLS. So this is a seller's timeline. And if you have any questions regarding selling your home, if you want a free home evaluation, if there's anything you need to know about real estate, please feel free to reach out. My name is Stephen Padernacht. Again, I am the team leader of the Padernacht real estate team at Keller Williams. I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I'm happy to answer any questions. So I appreciate your time today, and again, feel free to reach out. Take care, guys.